Throughout time, many writers have seemingly predicted the way our society would evolve. They wrote books about how it would become more restrictive, be more controlled, essentially becoming a dictatorship disguised as a free world. The question remains, however, who exactly are these visionaries such as Orwell, and how did they acquire such knowledge?
He was, by all accounts, an extremely nice guy. He worked for the BBC for quite a long time. He produced over, I think it was 125 shows for them. Interviewed some real top people, some really interesting people for that show, for his shows. Strangely, no record of his voice exists, even though he worked for the BBC for all that time. One of the reasons for that is because his throat was damaged in the Spanish Civil War. So his voice was slightly strange. What was he doing in the Spanish Civil War? A lot of very clever people got involved in the Spanish Civil War, which was, and can be proven to be, led by Freemasons. They were very proud of the fact that they were involved in that uprising. There are texts showing that they were pleased that they had got 5,000 people within the military. They actually stood there and said it and transcribed those details down. So we know that there is a secret society that was involved in revolutionary factions in Spain. George Orwell was one of the guys involved there. So involved that he got his throat shot. H.G. Wells was a man who was seriously into all the world of the esoteric secret societies. He got involved with Rosicrucians and all kinds of different things. Jules Verne, definitely a man who was involved. These are people that, as you rightly point out, were involved in the esoteric, involved in the secret societies, highly involved in politics. H.G. Wells was certainly, there's the man who coined the term New World Order. So they were definitely involved. H.G. Wells spent a lot of time in Russia with the communists, came back and gave a glowing report, some bad, some good, but mainly glowing. Spent time in America with the high-up politicians there, was deeply influential with the UN, the beginnings of the UN. In fact, a lot of people think that the UN was formed from his very own ideas, and that's actually, historical fact, that he was deeply involved with that.
H.G. Wells, you mentioned, he was somebody, I would strongly recommend anybody watching to look into an organisation called the Coefficients. And that was it was a think tank, really, one of the first British think tanks, and he was a member of it for, I think, at least 7 years, 1902, 1909, this kind of period. Bertrand Russell was also in that group, Sir Edward Grey. It was a real think tank of the British elite at that time, yeah? And it was brought together by Sidney and Beatrice Webb, who were socialists. So it was bilateral, you see. Bit like your New Labour project. Yeah? They were trying to draw together all kinds of people from different perspectives to answer the question, how can the empire survive in the 20th century and go forward in a position of dominance? And H.G. Wells was in there. And he, of course, came with his scientific idealism, his scientific utopianism. Personally, I would call him almost sort of bordering on a sort of a social fascism, which he had. Yeah? And that was really that the individual exists for the state.
Conan Doyle is another one. Conan Doyle was a Freemason, highly influential, built what they learnt into their stories, as George Orwell did. Knew full well that a lot of these secret societies' intentions were, as they saw it, good, but to create this utopia on earth, to have this new Jerusalem. And I think that a lot of that comes through in the books.
The thing that people need to look at when they're looking at 1984 and other examples of novels or prophecies or whatever that projected forward long distances and have proved to be accurate in terms of what's happening today, they need to ask themselves, how could they, all those decades ago and more, predict that things were going to happen with technology that hadn't even been invented then? How would they know that?
Well, it's interesting that George Orwell was working for the BBC at the time that he wrote 1984, and apparently wrote some of it actually at Bush House, the headquarters of the World Service. So I think he had a certain insight into some of the rather more, shall we say, extremist elements within the ruling class in this country, and I think he was aware that there is quite a nasty strain of ruling class people in Britain who have a lot of power and who have a complete disregard for human life, and that was seen in the Second World War to be something which was just simply a German thing. I think, yes, obviously it was largely a Nazi ideology, was totally pernicious towards human life, but I think they were documented, particularly in the United States, with George Bush's family and Prescott Bush. There was support for the Nazis within the Western world, and certainly within Britain. We had a king who had to be sort of quietly shuffled out of the way, who was pro-fascist, and I think there's clear evidence that there's still some kind of covert fascist influence within the British ruling class.
All the things that are going on all the levels, political, technological, secret society operations, black operations, are leaked to us in the movies. I don't really have a complete understanding of why they choose fictional means. I mean, you know, the jury's out. All I know is that they do it.
With online media playing such a fundamental role in our everyday lives, the effect of viewing alternative information in documentaries and presentations can have profound implications. And while you may want to inform everyone in your circle of friends and family, you may have some resistance to your attempt at enlightenment.
You get hurt because you suddenly found you've been told this like massive lie, you know, and most of the things that you believed in, have just been shattered. So as soon as you find something like that out, you start investigating more and more, and you think, well, what else have they done? What else have they been up to? You know, and I went down the road and I started looking at all this sort of kind of agenda. And one of my favourite books when I was a kid, was 1984. And I had read A Brave New World, but didn't rate it as much. But when I started looking at certain things to do with that and certain things that were going on in the world, a couple of things started to click.
Someone who is completely welded to this so-called 5 sense solid reality and believes that it's real and believes that this world is all there is, or believes in some religious deity or whatever, it's going to be one hell of a shock when they realize that their whole belief system was fraudulent. Their whole belief system was completely illusory. And it's basically like sitting in a room and other people in the room, in the little room, are telling you that this is all there is nothing else, or the something else beyond the room is some religious deity. And you get brought up in that room, your whole experience and knowledge and everything comes from that room. And then someone comes along and takes the lid off. Have a look at that, darling. I mean, it's going to blow your mind, isn't it?
I think the first reaction is incredulousness. Why, that can't be. You know, I didn't hear that on CNN or Fox. My parents didn't tell me about that. Nobody in school told me about that. But if you can get past that, and some people cannot, but if you can, then you start researching on your own, you suddenly find that the whole world and the history of the world is very different from what you've been taught.
I say that in my work I'm always emphasizing that light both conceals as much as it reveals. And I'm kind of shocked that people haven't noticed this simple dynamic. Light conceals as much as reveals. Could it be then that the Illuminati are using light because, for the same reason as a policeman, when he shines light in your face, he's blinding you? That light has this principle to also blind you? In
the United States, after all, we've put people in prison for conspiracy. And yet, when we talk about a conspiracy at the corporate or government level, they tend to poo-poo it and say, well, there can't be any such thing. What hogwash.
So who is running the show, you might ask? Well, that's the tricky part. This new world order is centuries in the making, and just when you think you've identified the bad guy, he's hung out to dry in an attempt to maintain face, as the agenda is all that matters, and no one is more important than the agenda. This is a team game, and the team serves the agenda, no matter what.
It's like a global spider's web. The center of the spider, or the spider in the center of the web, is in Europe. It's on operational level. It's in places like London and Rome and Paris and Germany. This web goes out across the world, and each strand in the web is an organization or a secret society that answers to the spider. The closer the strand is to the spider, the more secretive it is, the more exclusive it is. And if we're talking about names, what these guys try to do in the most secretive of their organizations is not to give them names at all. Because it's much more difficult to research something and uncover something that doesn't have a name. You want to try it. So you have to give it a name. You have to take that power away from this technique of no naming and give it a name. It doesn't matter if that's what they call it or not. You've given it a name, and therefore you've given it an existence which you can then start to uncover it. So I call it the Illuminati. And that's a name that's often been used. I mean, it's been used officially by an organization called the Bavarian Illuminati, which came obviously out of Germany through the Rothschilds and a guy called Adam Weishaupt. But that's not the Illuminati I'm talking about. That's a strand in the web. The web I call the Illuminati goes back thousands of years and beyond.
So Illuminati as a modern term, that's what we're discussing, is a term for this idea that all the secret societies of the world are all joined up at the hip and controlled from the top. In all the years of researching that I've done, I haven't yet found that man with the white cat, and I don't personally believe that there is a man there with a white cat stroking it, telling Mr. Bond that he's going to die. I really don't see that personally. What I do see men conspiring at every level, whether it's in the schoolyard or whether it's down at the Freemasonic Club or whether it's at Parliament or Congress. Wherever it is, men conspire.
There isn't just one psychopathic super criminal at the top, which is about as ludicrous as saying that there's a lone assassin was involved in the JFK murder. No. There's a bloodline. There's a generational thing going on here. There's a dragon court in operation, and they use the dragon symbol and they use the serpent symbol. It's right there in your face because that's their logo. Why should they not use it? A football team uses their logo. The police use their logo. The religions use their logo. The medical profession uses their logo, so does the Dragon Court.
The Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission in America, they are not known by most people in the public, but they're knowable. They operate in public because that's the spider's web starting to interact with mainstream society. Just a little bit back from that is the Bilderberg Group. And when you think that the real action is played out through these really exclusive secret societies close to the spider that dictate to the entire web, the Bilderberg Group is a strand in the web. And they have what I call defend the first domino. They know, for instance, that if the first domino goes down, it hits another domino, and suddenly you're starting to move. For instance, if you allow alternative healing to become widespread in society and accepted, the next question is, how does it work? So the first domino goes down. Okay, alternative healing, we accept it works. It's going to become part of mainstream society. Next domino, how does it work? Next domino, well, reality is not like we think it is. So you defend the first domino. And so with the spider's web, they want to defend the outer reaches of the web so you don't start to get deeper into it. So they're quite happy for people to think that the Bilderberg Group is it. That's where it's all being orchestrated through. Because they're out here. They're not where it really is.
Well, they won't tell us themselves what the objectives are. In fact, what they say is that they're just a private club that wants peace and this kind of thing. Ultimately, if you look at what they've been pushing for, it's consolidation of power to themselves. If you look at the policies that have come out of Bilderberg, albeit unofficially through Chatham House rules, which means that you're allowed to promulgate these policies, but you're not allowed to say where that you heard about them. And it's all to do with consolidation of power. For example, there's no whisper of forgiving debt to third world countries. Now, I would say that that is a place to start. In many ways, we are in debt to the third world countries for the way that we've abused them over the years, over the centuries even. And the idea that they should owe us something, I just find ridiculous. Now, this sort of idea is never to be found at a Bilderberg meeting. The other thing is that they are essentially looking at potential new leaders. That is to say, they are screening, vetting, interviewing potential new prime ministers, presidents around the NATO zone. And it is clearly tied in with NATO as well. The Secretary General of NATO always seems to appear magically at a Bilderberg conference the year before he gets nominated. And they do seem to wave this kind of what I call a magic wand of power. They bring someone along to a Bilderberg meeting, and amazingly enough, they become the next year maybe the leader of the opposition, and then of course possibly the Prime Minister and someone who's in charge of the country. This is the way that Tony Blair was slowly went on the ramp to success, and to be Prime Minister of Britain was, I mean, he was at a Bilderberg conference the year before he was nominated to be party leader of the Labour Party, for example.
I noticed that this year at the Bilderbergers event, the top guy of Google is going to be there. I don't need to say any more. We'll fill in the gaps with that one. Why on earth would Google, why is it so powerful? You know, fill the gaps in. So these things are definite. There are definitely men trying to control the situation, trying to run things for us. I wouldn't say that there is one top man, I wouldn't say that there is one top club, but they all seem to be like interwoven. That's what the evidence shows. The rest of it, unfortunately, becomes part of the imagination.
The trouble with Freemasonry is it's very difficult to actually pin it down, because nobody within Freemasonry will confirm or deny any allegations that are made about it. Now, this "we will not confirm or deny" approach, I think, is always, to any journalist, should immediately raise suspicions. If someone will not confirm or deny anything, then there better be a very good reason why they won't, because the job of journalists and the job of all organisations should be to tell the truth. Now, as soon as someone is not confirming or denying anything, then what they're doing is they are imposing what would normally be something to do with private privacy on a public body. So we're often told that Bilderberg is a private meeting. The only trouble is that the people at that private meeting are almost all, if not every single one of them, is a public figure with a great deal of public responsibility. So what they're trying to do is dress up these supranational pressure groups and very powerful organisations that formulate policy, and saying it's